What he does is also contribute to the coarsening of our discourse and debate here in the United States Senate. I had to check the standing rules of the Senate to see whether Rule 19, which governs the terms of debate, would cover the president or the president-elect. Because certainly, when the Senate rules say that no senator in debate shall directly or indirectly, by any form of words, impute to another senator or to other senators any conduct or motive unworthy or unbecoming of a senator, certainly the Democratic leader's comments, although not technically within the ambit of the rule, violate the spirit of the rule and the sort of debate and discussions that we ought to be having here in a civilized and civil and dignified sort of way. And I realize the Democratic leader will be leaving the Senate at the end of this year, and I hope that we can return to the sort of civil and dignified discourse and differences of opinion that we surely will have from time to time about matters of policy. This is a United States Senate, for heaven's sake. This is where those differences are supposed to be debated and litigated and discussed. And then we vote. But the sort of recriminations that the Democratic leader keeps coming back to just strike me as inappropriate and uncalled for. And rather than contribute to the sort of healing of our nation that Secretary Clinton, who, by the way, had more to complain about than the Democratic leader does in terms of the outcome, she ended up on the short end of the stick. Or the President of the United States, President Obama, the sort of comments they've made, the sort of gracious comments recognizing the importance of a peaceful transition of power from one presidency to another. That's the sort of tone that I wish we would hear more of here in the Senate and in the country generally, not to pour gasoline on the fire as the Democratic leader continues to do. It is true that we had an earth-shaking event occur on November the 8th, the election of Donald J. Trump as the 45th President of the United States. The reasons I believe that Mr. Trump was elected is because the American people want change. And they're eager for Washington to tackle the big challenges that we are facing as a nation, from terror threats abroad to a stagnant economy here at home. And they're looking forward to an administration that believes that the rules apply to all of us equally. In other words, equal justice under the law. Not that a separate set of rules apply to the Washington elites or those who can get away with it. That a different set of rules apply to them than apply to the rest of us in the country. They want equal justice under the law. They want restoration of the rule of law, something we haven't seen in the outgoing administration because of an over-politicized Department of Justice, among many other reasons. I personally look forward to working with the President-elect in the years ahead to address issues that are important to my state and to families across the country. And I'm grateful as well that the American people have entrusted such a big task to Republicans who will lead both chambers of Congress. In an election year that no one could predict, in fact, almost every prediction I made was wrong, but in an election year when very few people were right about their predictions.
Oh, if you guys want to watch this on Donald Trump Live News Universe, a YouTube channel, a live U.S. Senate debate on upcoming Donald Trump administration of the Senate floor. White folks are mad about this shit.
And I agree with them. I'll note the one thing that the American people didn't want to change, and that is the Republican majority in the United States Senate. And that led to the re-election of Republican senators in states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in addition to a new member of our conference from the great state of Indiana. And I look forward to welcoming all of them, as well as our new Democratic colleagues, to invite them to work with us to try to meet the challenges of these times and to work together to solve the challenges and problems that confront the American people. But it's very clear that the American people wanted a difference, wanted a change in the White House. They didn't want to change Republican majorities in both chambers of Congress. They didn't want to do just that. voters were able to cut through the noise and see what we've been able to accomplish so far. Not that they gave us the good housekeeping seal of approval, but they've seen a difference in the last 2 years under Republican majorities in the Senate that apparently they saw enough that they liked that they wanted to keep us in the majority. They've seen a Senate that's prioritized the American people and has carefully and methodically returned the United States Senate back to the basics of doing our job, which is legislating. And that includes passing key pieces of legislation through Congress, like the first multi-year highway bill in a decade. Now, I realize that doesn't excite a lot of people, but it's the basic fundamental job of the United States Senate and the Congress to legislate, to deal with our infrastructure needs like the Democratic leader talked about. We actually did deal with some of our major infrastructure needs by passing the first multi-year highway bill in a decade, which is important to our economy, to public safety, to the quality of the environment. That represents a substantial accomplishment. We also passed the first education reform law since No Child Left Behind, which was admittedly controversial. But we repealed the Common Core mandate and devolved more authority back from Washington, D.C., back to the states, back to our school administrators and parents and teachers where it belongs. We should have learned by now, Mr. President, the hard way, that when somebody's got a bright idea here in Washington, D.C. that hasn't been tried and tested across the rest of the country in the laboratories of democracy known as our states, we're just as likely to get it wrong, which is, I would say, exhibit number one, or A for that, is Obamacare. Trying to take 1/6 of our economy and transform it in a way that does not get the buy-in, much less of both political parties, much less the American people, only to see those promises not kept, does nothing to promote public confidence in their government. So we did pass the Every Student Succeeds Act, which does